Okay, magandang araw. Today we're going to discuss states, nations, and globalization. Let's define first what is a nation. Nation is described as a group of men resulting from common affinities are destined to be permanent, occupying a determinate territory within whose limits it maintains its own form of social organization. These are the group of men, having the same laws, religion, language, culture, civilization, yan, traditions. Um, Yan ang masasabi nating nation. A nation refers to a large group of individuals who believe that they belong together because they share common identity. So these are the group of people. Nations are born out of confluence of two factors: a group of people having cohesion in order that a community continue to exist as distinct identity. Individual members aspire to belong to a homogeneous community to have security and meaning. So, masasabi natin na ang nasyon ay nasyon kapag ito ay they continued their community, na kailangan wag uh, ma-discontinue ang kanilang identity. Yan ang nation. More on people. There are two classifications of nation. Yung ethnic nation. It's not ethnic, no. Ethnic nation. It is an identity that is united on the basis of ethnicity, populated by single group. Okay, makikita natin yan sa mga tribes, no. Then sila ay considered as nation. And may mga like yung based on the religion, yung Islamic religion. Ang tawag sa kanila ay Islamic nations or Muslim nation. Makikita natin na yung Egypt, Saudi Arabia, particularly in Southeast Asian nations, yung mga Muslim, sila ay nasyon eh. Pero iba-iba yung mga bansa nila. Territorial nation, ito, nasa isang lugar, in one territory, pero sabi nga, an entity that is populated by various ethnic groups that have been assimilated into a nation. Iba-iba. Okay. So, natapos natin ang nation. Now, what is a state? A state is, we can look at the four meanings or concept of state. We have dominance, territorial, social peace, and supremacy. Ito yung apat na makikita natin sa estado. Let's define dominance. It is rare to find a definition of the state. It's really hard. That does not deal with compulsion of all social institutions. Only the state requires obedience, acquiescence, and submission. Yung bang ang mga tao ay sumusunod, merong nangunguna. So, merong leadership sa estado. Pangalawa, meron silang territory. The state must have a definite area that it rules, demarcated by recognized borders. Outside of these borders, the state has no power. Another state has power. So, meron siyang borderline or yung merong demarcated ang kanilang territory. Pangatlo is social peace. The state is meant to promote some visions of social peace. The concept of controlling private violence by centralizing it is the very basic purpose of the state. The state provides a court of appeal for disputes so that they do not turn into violent altercation. So, sa estado, pinapangalagaan ang kapayapaan. And lastly, yung supremacy. The state must be separated from the rest of civil life, at least constitutionally, if not in practice. A state must contain bureaucratic offices that are not intrinsically connected with other social institutions, collectively known as civil society. So, it is organized at merong namumuno or merong gobyerno. Okay, how can we differentiate the two, the state and the nation? Una, a nation is a group of people who shared common cultural heritage, bonding because of shared history and geographical boundaries. Ang state naman is defined as a patch of land with a sovereign government. It is a political unit with the sovereign power over a piece of land. A state can also be defined as a community in a specific area governed by specific government. So, ang estado ay has to do with land. A nation does not create laws, no? Ang mga tao o yung nasyon, a nation has customs and traditions, but the state creates law. So we can see the difference. People in a nation do not have to share language or tradition, always to be called nation. In the state, the people are collected together, the law or the ruling powers, the sovereign or the government holds. A nation is more of political and cultural combination. A state is a political and judicial combination. 6. A nation to be called nation does not necessarily have to be inside the same boundaries. Example, yung Jewish nation, ano sila scattered sila. Pero sila ay uh, masasabi nating Jew kahit na wala silang bansa. No? Scattered before 1948. No, after 1948, meron na silang bansa or estado. A state to be called a state, it clearly needs to be to a particular area over which it holds power. There are states that are also nations, and in such circumstances, they are called nation states. A state can also be a reference to the province of a country, as in America, state of California, Oregon, etc. So we can see the difference between the state and the nation. Now, what are the elements of the state? The people, territory, government, and sovereignty or soberanya. Um, ang ang isang mawala rito ay hindi natin makonsider na estado ang isang estado o isang bansa. Ang tao, they are simply referred to as inhabitants of the state, yung mga nakatira. The number of the population must be numerous enough for self-sufficiency, able to defend themselves, and must be enough to govern and sustain the state. There are states that are composed only of a few people like the Vatican or having a very large population like China. So iba-iba based on the population. Ang pinakamaliit na bansa o estado ay ang Vatican. And yet siya ay estado. So there must be people residing in a state to be governed and to perform the leadership role. So mahalaga ang estado na merong tao. Territory, the fixed space or portion of earth inhabited by people of the state. The components of the territory are the land mass, otherwise known as terrestrial uh, terrestrial domain, the inland and external waters, which make up the maritime and fluvial domain, and the air space above the land and water, called the aerial domain. Okay, so water, air, and the land. Okay, this is the territory. State must have a definite territory on which the people can reside. It does not only consist of the land but also water and air. Yun ang pag-usapan natin. Ang government naman, yung nangunguna, it is defined as the agency or instrumentality through which the will of the state is formulated, expressed, and realized. No particular form of government described. The mandate of this particular element of the state is to promote the welfare of the people, meet the needs of the people. Yan ang ating gobyerno. Okay. Now, there are functions, two functions ng government, constituents and ministrants. When we say constituents, ito yung mandato sa kanila ng gobyerno dapat nilang gawin sa kanilang constituents. The band of society and compulsory among them. Ang ministrant this is not an obligation, but this is something to do with for the people by the government. in the form of service. Number one, in uh, this is a compulsory, and they have to abide with their role. Number one is keeping the peace, order, and protection of person and property. Security. Securing civil relations of its inhabitants. Uh, Papasok dyan ang kapayapaan. Regulating property and determining liabilities for debts and crimes. Determining contractual rights, defining punishment of crimes. Administering justice and political duties. Defining the privileges and relations of citizens. Sa ministrants, those undertaken to advance the general interests of the society like charity, trade and industry, and public works. Yung mga basic needs ng mga tao should be met by the government. Now, last one is sovereignty o soberanya. Ito yung uh, inaangkin natin na ito ay ating bansa. Ownership. It refers to the independent authority over a geographical area such as territory. Sovereignty is also the authority of the state exercises to exact obedience over its constituents. It is the inherent power of the state to impose its will on its people free from outside control. There are two aspects, internal and external sovereignty. Yung internal is this is the unhindered power of the state to rule over its people. Walang makikialam particularly sa from external. Yung external sovereignty, freedom from foreign rule or control. So, yun yung ating kasarinlan. Now, there are fundamental power of the state. Police power, power of eminent domain, and power of taxation. Sa police power, it pertains to the power of the state to expropriate private property for public use. Upon payment of just compensation, there are requisites to be observed in the exercise of this power. There must be a necessity to acquire private property. To acquire the property shall be for public use. The owner must be paid just compensation. There must be observance of due process in the expropriation of property. Has to do with the property. Police power, power of taxation. It is the power of the state to impose charges. Lahat ng mga taxes, no? Yan ang ginagawa niya. Oops, na-miss natin yung isa. Now, let's go to globalization. Globalization's influence on nation states. Globalization is the process of interaction and integration among people, companies, and government worldwide. So, when we talk about globalization, what we eat, what we drink, what we use, no, or things na ginagamit natin, masasabi natin from other countries, and yun, ibig sabihin buhay na buhay ang globalization. As complex and multifaceted phenomenon, globalization is considered by some as a form of capitalist expansion which entails the integration of local and national economies into a global and regulated market economy. Okay? Political globalization refers to the growth of the worldwide political system, both in size and complexity. So, ang bansa ay mayroong pangailangan to sustain our budget, for instance, and we are borrowing money from other countries. Kaya lang, when we do that, mayroong mga tinatawag na conditions. Doon papasok ang political globalization. Okay. Okay. For instance, yung ating coronavirus disease, no? Ito ay nanggaling sa China. Na-globalize din tayo. Yun, nagkaroon ng pandemic dito, even here in the Philippines. So we need to work with other countries to hinder or stop this coronavirus. And other things like yung mga gadgets, socialization on social media, social movements, etc. Yan ay bahagi ng tinatawag na globalization. Now, I'd like to add this classification of countries. We have developed countries, developing countries, and underdeveloped countries. So when we say developed countries, they are rich, powerful, and stable countries to gain upper hand in economic competitiveness. Ito yung tulad ng Amerika, ng China. They can dictate, they can do what what uh, they are what they are thinking, lahat na yan, no? They are policy making and shaped by international financial flow. Ang developing countries like the Philippines, no, um, wala tayong kakayanan, pero we can, sabi nga, pwede tayong, actually our economy is growing. We are not poor, we are developing country. So these are the countries that are not yet rich but has increased economic status to sustain the needs of the people. Weak structures, reliance on the single export product or export market, inability or unwillingness to develop new markets. Yan ang kailangan makita natin kung ano yung ating niche or yung ating product na talagang pwede tayong ang magdikta. Lumawa na lang sa kotse o sasakyan. Lahat yun ay imported. Ano yung mga in-export natin? So, wala walang masyadong agricultural, banana, etc. So, pero yung mga things na lalo na pagdating sa technology ay meron tayong kahinaan dito. And when we talk about underdeveloped countries, these are the poor countries who barely or have not at all increased their economic status to sustain the needs of people and country. So these are the things that we discussed in nation, states, and globalization. Now, our activity is write at least 250 words for each essay topic in the yellow pad. Okay, the topics are the impact of globalization on Philippine economy. Two, the impact of a Filipino product program of civil society. How to fight the COVID-19. Of course, there is a introduction, the body, and conclusion. Okay. Thank you very much for listening. God bless.